Well, today our guests are Tony and Susan Williams and are currently living in Columbus, Ohio. They completed the pre-engagement counseling program in February of 2008, the premarital counseling program in May of 2009, and were married in June of 2009. Thank you for joining us today. Are you ready to begin?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, would you tell us a little bit about yourselves and provide us a brief background on how and when you met, when you started dating, and your engagement story?
So we met in fall of 2005 and just really kind of built a good foundation and a friendship and started dating about 8 months later in April of 2006. And yeah, so that was just over 14 years ago, which seems crazy. Yeah, just really got to know each other and formed a solid foundation and yeah, became best friends. Do you want to tell the engagement story?
Sure. I always love telling the engagement story. So we met actually as part of the marching band at Liberty University. And so started off as really good friends, and that's also where most of our friendships at school were formed. And so once we'd started dating and once we had moved towards, actually deciding that that we wanted to get married, I of course started planning how I was going to propose. Because of course in Lynchburg there are so many different ways and so many different fun opportunities to propose. And Susan had told me at one point in one discussion that if I had ever proposed in front of a large crowd, she wanted her family to be there. So I had the wonderful idea to make her plan her own engagement party, and she didn't know about it. So right before, yeah, she was actually she was living with my aunt at the time, and my aunt had a pool in her backyard, and so I asked Susan to plan a pool party for all of our bando friends right before school was to start. So it was right after band camp, right before school was supposed to start, and told her that, hey, I'll provide live music with my cousin and my brother and a couple other people, but I'm going to need you to plan everything because I'm working at the time. So she did a great job, planned a wonderful party. We had a great time. We had probably 30 people from band there at least. Wow. And so, of course, I did live music with my brother and two of my cousins. And the last song I performed was "Making Memories of Us" by Keith Urban, which is our song. Mm-hmm. And there's a particular line in the song that says, "I want to honor your mother, and I want to learn from your pa." And right as I sang that line, her parents, who had been hiding in the house, walked out of a door behind me onto the back porch. And as soon as she saw them, she knew what was happening and what was going down. But at that point, that's as soon as the song was over, I swung my bass around with my back, dropped down to one knee, and popped the question.
And you said, "I'll have to think about it," right?
Yeah. No, she said yes, and she's been thinking about it ever since.
That's awesome. I still remember that story. You told us that, gosh, it's been 12 years or so.
12 years ago.
Yeah. That made a big impression. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was great. Well, what primarily influenced you to commit to the pre-engagement services that we offered? And almost 11 years later, are you still glad you made that investment?
Yeah, I think we're both really, really thankful that we made that investment. What sparked it though was I felt like we had done. I felt like a really thorough job in getting to know each other and really, like I said, forming that foundation. But I knew there were things that we had not covered that we needed to discuss, even though I wasn't sure what those were. Somebody else who knew better than us was going to know what those were. So I think that was what sparked it for us to pursue some premarital counseling as well.
Yeah. And even a little bit deeper into that is, we both are very much of the opinion that marriage is a commitment for life. Not something to be entered into lightly, not something to just jump in and see what happens. It's a true covenant, a true commitment, and anything of that magnitude takes planning, takes preparation, takes forethought. So that was also part of the decision going into that.
Excellent. Well, do you remember your first big fight, and how did you work through it, and how do you typically work through problems now?
Go ahead.
So the one that always pops into my head, and there's two here. There's one that's prior to marriage, and even prior to engagement, I think at this point, and then one that I'll talk about regarding after marriage. So we used to play this game called the question game, where we would just ask each other a question and both have to answer honestly. And we were at a Barnes & Noble date, which we would go to basically Barnes & Noble, and just each of us would pick a book, we'd get a coffee, and we'd just sit there and read. Wouldn't even have to talk to each other. We'd just do that. And so we were playing the question game at the same point. And one of the questions came up, if we ever get married, and if we have daughters, of which we have 3 now, by the way, would we allow them to go to school dances for public school? I went to public school. I went to school dances. I had no problem with it.
I went to public school and did not go to school dances.
And had a problem with it.
This is hypothetical at this point.
And
we
so
don't have kids.
This hypothetical innocent question, and I don't even remember what it was that set me off. I don't even think it was the conversation itself. It was prior to both of us obviously going through the premarital counseling and learning how to fight fair. Mm-hmm. So
I know what set him off.
Oh, she remembers.
So I have a horrible tendency to think through arguments and options A, B, C, D, E, and F, because I'm a little bit type A. And so I had played this conversation out in my head well in advance, and all of the different scenarios surrounding it, and I had comebacks for every single one of them. And
I was blindsided. I was literally having to think up my responses in the moment.
I think this was my question in the question game.
Yeah,
I asked the question.
You did. Was not able to plan it out ahead of time. Had no idea what about. To me, this started off as, hey, just a hypothetical, simple question that led into this hour-long conversation where we actually finished our coffee in Barnes & Noble, moved out to the parking lot, and we're sitting in her car still having this discussion. And I'm getting madder and madder because it's moving into me feeling attacked because she has every response just firing off ready to go. And so I'm feeling attacked. I'm feeling stupid because obviously I didn't come prepared to this one. And it got to the point where I actually got out of the car and walked away. Meanwhile, it's pouring down rain. I'm out in the rain, just letting it literally cool me off. And she's in the car going, where'd it go? We were having a good debate. Not realizing how angry I actually was. And so we ended up, I don't know that we've ever actually finished that particular conversation.
I think we came to the conclusion that we should decide that as the kids get older.
Yeah.
I was going to say, do you want to commence? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know.
We could finish it now.
It's not raining right now. We need to wait until it starts raining again.
I think how we work through conflict now, though, is, like I said, I have a really bad and yet very type A way of just looking at every situation from every angle before I even bring it up to him. Mm-hmm. So if I bring a concern or question to him, I have just learned that even though I have kind of looked at this from every angle that I can think of, I really just need to shut up and let him process and work through it. And sometimes that takes a couple of days. And I'm sitting there going, come on. but that's, I mean, I think, and I fail all the time. And I just have to remind myself, and he reminds me sometimes, like, I just need to process through all of this. And
there are times where it takes a couple days because I've forgotten what the question is. And that's when she does remind me, and you know, I move it up in my brain priority.
We've never yelled.
Wow, that's excellent.
That is. I'm impressed.
I really respect the way that he does conflict. Like, we've resolved that yelling doesn't resolve anything, and getting louder and trying to out-talk the other person is not the way to come to a compromise. We've never once yelled in
Doesn't
conflict.
mean we haven't wanted to.
I'm sure. Yeah, I remember learning that lesson earlier in our marriage that Heather needed time to process, is where I was ready to go.
Yeah.
And I eventually learned that when I give her that space and stop pursuing that answer immediately, it takes a shorter amount of time than if I just keep pursuing. So ultimately, giving her space resolves it faster.
And he loves efficiency.
Yep.
And it's the same way with us. I had forgotten all through our counseling how I matched up so much with Heather, and Eric and Susan were partners in crime. About that.
A lot of similarities. Yep.
Yep.
Well, excellent. You said you had a second one?
I think it comes in another question.
Another question. Okay. So other than our pre-engagement and premarital programs, how did you prepare for married life?
So Tony already mentioned the question game. We still do that on occasion.
Still do that. Not nearly as often.
Very rarely, but on occasion we'll just bust out and say your question. And
You want a good argument? I was kidding.
catches the other person completely off guard, but it's really fun.
And we don't. I will say this, Eric. We don't call them arguments. We actually learned this from a couple in our church, in our current church. We now have exercises in marital communication.
Excellent.
I like it.
I do too. As soon as we heard that, we're like, we're stealing that.
Anyway, yeah, I think the question game really prepared. Like, we just felt free to ask anything and everything, knowing that we were, well, hopefully getting an honest answer from the other person, because we wanted to move forward with the relationship, and you better be honest. So
And it built knowledge of the other person, but I think more than that, especially early on, it built trust, because we were trusting each other with some, as we went along, some very personal questions, some very deep questions, and trusting on both parts, not just to answer honestly, but that the other person would not betray that trust, would take that knowledge, you know, that Susan would take that knowledge of me that I'm giving her and would be respectful of it, would, you know, not go sharing it out with any of her friends, you know, wouldn't end up on Facebook somewhere. So, you
which
know,
at that
it
time
was
was still very new.
yeah, and it was a big step for a lot of the questions that we were asking.
Are there any particular rules to the question game that people should know about?
If you're dating, keep it clean.
Yeah.
You don't want to get into conversations that are going to spark things that should not be sparked yet. Yeah, be respectful of each other. Like Tony was saying, like, we're giving honest answers, and if you are going to betray that trust and go and like judge the other person for the way that they feel and the way that they or even like their upbringing, or like that can be really offensive and detrimental, I think.
And it is a two-person game. One person asks, both people answer. So, you know, just because you ask the question doesn't mean you get to get out of answering it. In fact, if you've asked the question, you better be prepared to answer first, because the other person will probably have to think.
Don't ask a question you're not prepared to answer yourself.
Is the questioner always first?
Not always.
No, not always. Sometimes the person who asks the question goes first because they've already prepared an answer to the question they've asked. But
it's not a hard and fast rule.
Nah.
Are there times where the other person says, I have to think about it, and then you give them time, I'm assuming, and then how much time or is that normally?
At that point, it just kind of becomes,
both people have to answer before you ask the next question.
Yes.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
So you don't move on to the next question until both people have answered this one.
Yeah.
So, but other than that, I mean, it can take however long it needs to take. And obviously, if again, early on, you have the ability to say, you know what, I don't really want to answer that one, and back out, and either come back to it later, or, if it's going to be a question where that's a hill worth dying on, that can make or break the relationship.
Yeah. Good. Okay, well, how important has shared goals and shared mission in marriage been for you two?
Oh my gosh. So I mentioned that we met at school in Lynchburg, Virginia. We got married in Milford, Delaware. Moved back to Lynchburg, Virginia because I was still finishing up school. And
I had a job there.
And you had a job there. And within 9 months or so, we moved to Columbus, Ohio. Neither of us has family out here. Neither of us have friends out here, had friends out here. It's the reason that we did that was because of a shared goal and mission to come to Ohio to attempt to plant a church. We came out here with no jobs. We came out here with no house. Like we had a house, but we had to do house hunting online for everything. We had very little support behind us. We had one family out here that we knew, and that was my youth pastors who were coming out to plant the church with us. And so it literally was the 5 of us, because they had a young son, Levi, at that point, who was baby, 2 years old. So, we had to move out here. We had to find a job. We had to find some level of church that we could attend while trying to plant a church, with the knowledge that the reason we were coming to Columbus to plant a church was because there was not very many gospel-centered churches in the Columbus area. So, none of that really could have been accomplished at all if we did not have a shared goal and a shared mission. We worked for 2 years to plant the church, and eventually, decided that it was not God's time for us to successfully plant. Meanwhile, during that time, we went through 2 miscarriages. We went through Susan losing her job while pregnant with our first daughter. I ended up having to work 2 jobs, 2 full-time jobs, in addition to attempting to plant the church while having a newborn. I didn't sleep for 6 months. It was rough. There were so many challenges that could have very easily torn us apart. It would have been nothing for Susan to look at me and say, I have nobody out here. And now I'm home by myself all day with a screaming infant. And night while you're doing this other stuff. I'm going back home to my family. And she didn't. Because, again, we both are of the opinion that a marriage covenant is just that we work through whatever challenges come together, because we are a cord of 3 strands. We're not individual. We're a cord of 3 strands between the 2 of us and God. And now our cord is getting even stronger because we've gone from 1 daughter to 3 daughters. And we're teaching them that same mindset, that family is forever. As my mom says, the love remains, TLR. You know, that is kind of the motto of our family.
Yeah, I think that is the ultimate shared goal and mission, is our covenant to Christ first and then to each other. And your goals as individuals and as a married couple, your goals and your missions are going to change over time. And it's important to continue communicating that with each other so that you can come to a common goal and mission as a couple. Like I said, all the while going back to your original goal and mission, which is your covenant.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, good. Well, what is the most significant challenge you have faced together?
So that's the second fight.
I think yours and mine differ on this a little bit. Like it's a very close.
A little bit.
Go ahead.
Maybe. But I'll start and you can join in. So one of the areas that I struggle in is financial management. I'm very easy to splurge and just to spend, and it's not so good. So,
but as the head of the household, I wanted to give him the opportunity to. And I do fine with finances.
Yeah, and I wanted to try and take that opportunity to change something in myself. And I failed miserably. Like there were times that even when I was working two pretty good paying jobs, we were living paycheck to Wednesday before the next paycheck. And what was worse was I was hiding that from Susan. And there was a lot of pride issues going on. There was a lot of obviously dishonesty, a lot of selfishness, just a whole lot of everything that was going on, to the point that it got to a point where I finally admitted all of this, or Susan actually found out and asked, and I
was like, "Where's all our money going?"
Yep.
And so I said, "I want to see our bank statements." So I looked at our bank account and started seeing things that shouldn't, just frivolous spending that should not have been on there. And meanwhile, I'm at home trying to make homemade shampoo because I thought it was going to save us quite a bit of money.
And so we that night was a rough one. It was the first night where, and really the only night where Susan was actually prepared to just go sleep elsewhere. And
still in the house.
Still.
Just leave.
Yeah, like instead of sending me to the couch, she was going to go find a bed elsewhere in the house. And we ended up staying up and talking through it. I took my debit card out of my wallet for a while after that point. And
she gave it to me.
Gave it to Susan.
Surrendered it. It was done.
And really gave her control of the finances. And we made the decision at that point to go through some of our friends were going through Financial Peace University. So we went through that.
Excellent.
I jumped on board with it and did everything that I could to be supportive of that. But I learned to give up my pride. I don't do well managing the household finances. So even to this day, I still don't. And that was 7 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, 5 or 6.
But since then, we have been just blessed with how well Susan has managed our finances. We went from living paycheck to Wednesday before the next paycheck to, in almost 3 months' time, having a pretty significant chunk in savings, to having the majority of our debt paid off, and to actually being able to take some of our finances to bless others who were hurting, or who needed finances for medical issues and things like that. And we've continued to be able to do that. So that was a hard lesson for me. And that was honestly a scary one, because I had a lot of fear and anxiety that was going to be the straw that would cause her to say,
I don't know why he's always afraid I'm going to leave. Like,
I'm paranoid.
Well, it is. I mean, financial issues is the number one cause, cited as the number one cause of divorce in America. So
that's what was going through my head even prior to having this conversation, and why my mentality was, okay, I know that I'm not doing this well. I know that I'm not managing it well, but I can't let her know that. So learn to listen.
do you both discuss finances now, even though Susan's like managing it? Are you both still discussing it?
Yeah, and it's
I'm probably more open with it than he would like for me to be. He probably is just like, you know what, you do great. You do you. Like, you're doing an amazing job. And so I don't really need to know. You just tell me what I can spend. But I like to be like financial
Transparent. Yeah. Well, and the other issue is that when one person is competent with it and takes it on and does so for several years, and the other person has no involvement, it becomes a burden to that person because there's no sharing of that responsibility, like even emotional sharing of that financial responsibility. And so it's important to at least discuss it and share it, even verbally.
Yep. Like this past couple of weeks, we mentioned that Susan's been doing a lot more landscaping, and so we've made some trips to Lowe's or to Strader's or some of these other places, and you know, she's been calling me like, so I found all this and this and this and this and this, and I think it's going to cost about this much. Is that okay? And I'm like, dude, we're fine. Go for it. You do. You know, along those same lines. But again, it's knowing that we are stable to do that because we have worked together, and she has managed and I have cut back a little bit.
And even though like I am the financial manager of the family, like this is still a team. We're not, like, I'm not solo in this. It is not my will be done. I want to make sure that my spending a little extra here and there is okay. Like that's a common goal, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. So Susan, at the beginning, you said that yours might be different. Is this on the same theme, or did you want to have to add something, or?
No, it's it's different. It's, I think for me, probably the hardest part of, and it didn't like rip us apart or anything like that, but the miscarriages for me were probably harder emotionally than the financial issues. Like financial issues you can come out of. You can never get your kids back. Mm-hmm. And whoa. So that part for me was more hurtful, and there was nothing that either of us had done wrong, but it was the hardest to work through, even as a couple, because he was processing it way differently than I was processing. And so it could have ripped us apart. It really could have. But I was thankful that he was really patient and let me verbalize things the way that I needed to, even though he didn't process the same way. So that for me was harder.
Yeah. Well, that's understandable. It really is. Well, going to something a little bit lighter. What one thing do each of you remember from our sessions as being particularly helpful for your relationship?
Oh, we know that one. Okay. So sorry. It seems like such a random little nugget, but I think the thing that I remember the most is Eric telling me, you guys are going to change throughout the course of your marriage. And I remember sitting there going, we're not changing. He must be out his mind. But it is so true. And I remember you telling me, like, when you change, because you're going to, you have to communicate that with the other person, because that's what happens over the course of time is you make all these teeny tiny little changes, but you end up growing apart. And then suddenly, for instance, you're empty nesters and you don't know each other because you've changed so much and you have not communicated those changes. So that, to me, every time I feel like it's like, no, I don't like that anymore. Or yeah, I do. I have come around to whatever. I need to communicate that with him because it has not always been that way.
Excellent.
For me, yeah, for me, mine is definitely learning to fight fair. You know, that's something that has served both of us to the point where when we have disagreements, when we have exercises in marital communication, we use them specifically for that, to you know, to mention the things that are changing, to work through challenges or problems that could very easily drive us or drive other people apart. And it's something that I've been able to use not just in our marriage, but in daily life. You know, in working with people in a customer service industry. Oh my gosh, if there's anybody who ever needs to know how to fight fair, it's people working in customer service. Or parents. That's a big one. Because wow, do kids not know how to fight fair? But you know, that has changed and helped me grow, because I have had temper problems in the past. I have had moments where I don't fight fair and when I can get pretty mean. But thankfully, I would hope you would agree that I have never done that with her or with our kids. And honestly, since going through the premarital, I don't know that I've done it even with others.
Excellent. Good. Well, what advice do you have for other couples who are considering marriage?
So even before Tony and I started dating, I did a lot of reading and listening to different studies on dating and marriage and relationships, how to make them work, blah, blah, blah. Because again, type A. I'm not denying this. And one of the things that resonated with me, it was just a little analogy that that the person said, was that marriage is like handing the other person a firearm and them handing you one. You hold it against the person's chest and they hold it against yours, directed straight at their heart, and you're trusting that that person is not going to pull the trigger. That resonated. But after being married for almost 11, I would say that it wasn't complete. It wasn't a complete statement, because you're going to break each other's hearts. You're going to pull the trigger. They're going to pull the trigger. The foundation needs to be set where Christ is first. You're seeking Christ first, and you're seeking each other second. And that way, when the trigger is pulled, you have that foundation to fall back on and work through, and your marriage will survive pretty much anything.
Excellent.
It's wise.
Yeah.
It's very wise.
Very good. Do you have any advice, Tony?
Just, you know, I first off agreeing with what Susan had said, but then knowing that, again, my own personal personal experience is that selfish pride has no place in a marriage. It will cause more issues than you think you are fixing. The only pride you should take in a marriage is pride in your spouse. I'm very proud of my wife, of everything that she has done for me as a wife, for everything that she continues to do for my children as their mother, for everything that she does around our house as a housekeeper, even to the point now of, working a little bit outside of the house as a children's ministry director for our church. And she's taking time to invest not only in our children, not only in our family, but in the children and families of countless others. And I'm proud of the work that she does for Christ through that. That's the kind of pride that belongs in a marriage, in seeing and building up your spouse.
I would say too, be cautious that you're not holding your significant other to a standard of this person is going to make me happy and meet all of my needs all the time and is never going to hurt me and all of that. That's an unfair standard, and that it's going to fail. That standard is going to fail.
Yep, every time. Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Well, in hindsight, how did you know that the other person was the one for you?
I think I just came to the realization, like, this person is my best friend. I feel like I can tell him anything, and not that I can't live without him, but I would much rather go through life with this person than without this person. There's nothing that I can think of that I want to go through without him. And so basically you just run towards Christ, and there are going to be some people ahead of you and there's going to be some people behind you, and you just look over at the person next to you who's running at the same pace and you say, hey, and let's do this thing together. And yeah,
That was my second.
yes.
Because we do stuff like that.
We high five a lot.
I remember y'all high-fiving in our sessions.
Yeah, I remember that too.
We laugh, we have fun. Nowadays and always, Hollywood and everybody shows marriage as this passionate, always lovey-dovey, always, all up on each other, whatever the kind of thing it is. And marriage has those moments. But marriage is day to day. It is the one foot in front of the other, walking down the path of life. And I knew Susan was the one because she made the walk fun. There are tough times. There are times where you trip on the path and you stumble. Sometimes you trip because the other person tripped you. But there's still
That's what makes the walk fun.
Intentionally. No.
Sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, but they're always there to pick you back up again and brush you off, sometimes laugh at you, and most of the time you need that because it gets you laughing again. Like we said, we've been through challenges, we've been through tough things, we've been through and things that many other people go through. And I wouldn't want to do it with anybody else.
Well, that's excellent.
Can I ask them one question?
Sure.
That's been burning. Okay, I remember you guys had a really long engagement.
Oh my Lord.
If a couple were to come to you and say, how long should we be engaged before married, what advice would you have for them?
However long you need to be engaged for.
Okay.
Like it's not a race. Like don't run to the altar just because you think it's gonna make everything all better. It's not. Do the work, put the effort in, and make sure that this is the person that you want to spend forever with. Because I mean, 11 years has flown by, but there are times where it's like, man, this is a long time. And
Yeah.
but I look back and look at it and say, gosh, I can't believe we've been married for almost 11, together for 14. That blows my mind. And I'm gonna get old with this guy.
Lord willing, absolutely.
I'm already old with my gray hair and everything. And Heather, I'd agree with Susan on that. You know, we had a very long engagement. We watched friends who started dating and got engaged after us get married before us, and that was tough. That was really, really hard. But God knew that we needed that time for whatever reason. And
our reason originally was that we wanted to finish school, but we really had the opportunity to spend a long time with you guys, to again, to really go like just be put through the ringer as a couple, and you know, and really be sure about the commitment we were making. I don't regret a long engagement.
you know, a lot of people will say, oh, 6 to 9 months, that's the max, don't go any more than that. And I see why they say it, but I really see why they say it. But again, it's up to the couple. It's up to what you feel God is leading you towards. If God is leading you towards a long engagement, then listen to what he says, because anything that you rush is potentially going to have consequences. Anything that you know, if God is leading you towards a short engagement, you know, my brother, whom I love dearly, dated and was engaged and married his wife in less than a year. I mean, it was like lightning quick. But that's what God had in place for them. And it worked perfectly for them. So every couple is different. There is no cookie cutter 6 to 9 months for everybody everywhere. It's not possible. Humans are different. Humans are unique. And when you have two unique people who are deciding to join together, that in and of itself is unique, even apart from the two people. And so would I recommend a long engagement? No. No, never. But I'm not going to talk you out of it if that's what God's leading you to.
That's fair.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for participating in this Hindsight interview. It was great seeing you two again, and hopefully we'll see you guys sometime in the near future.
Absolutely.
Thank
Love
you.
you guys.
Thank you.